Lucy Hicks Anderson was one of the most well-known women in Ventura County during Prohibition. She hosted famously elaborate parties for the richest folks in town, while just across the tracks, she ran a boarding house that provided both liquor and women. And when the people of Ventura found out that she was a trans woman, they challenged her marriage, and she became the first trans person in history to go to court to fight for it. In the small town of Waddy, Kentucky, the Lawsons brought their child to a local doctor. They had a unique situation on their hands. In 1886, Mrs. Lawson had given birth to a baby boy. However, their child soon informed them that she was not a boy, that her name was Lucy, and that she would be wearing a dress to school. Thank you very much. And in a time when this was almost unheard of, the doctor encouraged them to accept Lucy for who she was and raise her as a girl. Lucy left school at 15 and supported herself as a domestic worker. She headed west at age 20 and married her first husband at age 34 to become Mrs. Lucy Hicks. The newlyweds settled in Oxnard, California, a booming farm community in Ventura County, 60 miles north of Los Angeles. Lucy did well for herself in Oxnard, working as a nanny and a cook for wealthy families and catering elaborate parties for the town's elites. She was successful, well-connected, and not afraid to skirt the law. While she was winning contests for her dinner rolls and fruitcakes, she was also running a boarding house as a brothel and selling illegal liquor. These were Prohibition days, mind you. She was arrested twice in the 1920s for possession of intoxicating liquor, but used her social connections to avoid any serious consequences. Once a wealthy banker even bailed her out just so she could still cater his dinner party that evening. Lucy continued to work both uptown and underground until 1945. By this time, she was 59 years old and a fixture in the community. She had recently married her second husband, Reuben Anderson, a retired soldier. When the Navy tracked cases of venereal disease back to Lucy's boarding house, the doctor who examined all of Lucy's girls insisted on examining Lucy as well. That examination revealed her gender history and put her at the center of a scandal that rocked Ventura County. Lucy was charged with falsifying marriage documents and defrauding the government by claiming her husband's GI benefits. The court argued that she wasn't legally married to her husband because in their eyes, she was a man. And of course, marriage was between a man and a woman. Lucy stood her ground and argued that her lived identity was more valid than what was printed on her birth certificate. She said, "I defy any doctor in the world to prove that I am not a woman. I have dressed and acted as just what I am, a woman." Despite Lucy's defiant declaration to the world, the jury found her guilty of impersonation and fraud. Her marriage was declared null and void, and in addition to serving time, she was also sentenced to 10 years probation. What's more, the courts forbid her from wearing women's clothing. She and Reuben served their time and eventually settled in Los Angeles, living quietly out of the public eye. Trans people today are still fighting for the right to survive and be who they are. So when same-sex couples cut their wedding cakes today, may they think of the struggle that still continues and raise a toast to Lucy Hicks Anderson. Lucy's story is just one of the many untold histories of trans pioneers who have lived, loved, and died in this country. We have truly been around.
What do I like about flying? I guess it is being a bird, to be able as a person, as a human being, to lift off from the earth. I can't tell you what a pleasing thing is to be taking off from an airport and you're in the clouds and you're flying up and there's sort of all of a sudden there's a glow in front of you. And as you go further and further and you break out, you see the clouds look like just wonderful balls of cotton all lit up by the moon. It's extraordinary. My name is Robina Este. I'm 92 and I live in New York all my life. I am a commercial pilot and I'm a flight instructor. Because of that, the Navy wanted me to join them. So I worked my way up in rank and then I became 21 in 1942. Of course, the war had started by then, and in the Pacific, I flew airplanes. It was quite an adventure. I must say that it was a startling, delightful time in my life. One of the unique things about flying is that you've got to be able to move from one position to another because you can, and not accept where you are. In 1976, I finally decided that I must become a woman. What was so amazing about it, once I made the change, I became a woman in body and soul and mind. It ended up being a rebirth. The prejudice against me changing was extraordinary. I was a vice president of a pretty big mutual fund at that time. I was going to work as a man and changing to a woman. In the evening, it became quite burdensome, and I knew that it would never be acceptable then. And finally, one day, I said, that's it. And I quit and decided I had to live and work as a woman. So I went out as a woman in the world and I changed my sex in aviation. Now, as far as the FAA is concerned, they only know me as a woman. I changed my Social Security, I changed my driver's license, and I even got a passport for the United States as a woman. Norwood Samuel Patton. He was born on August 15th, 1915. After I changed, we met at a bar, and then we met again for a little date, and it ended up that we became very, very close. When I saw that, look, this has to be serious, I knew that I had to then tell Norwood. So I told him, and he was very upset. But inside of a week, he came back to me and told me, look, I don't care. You're a woman. I only know you as a woman. You are a beautiful woman, and I love you, and I'm very devoted to you, and I want always to be with you. And that was the summation of it. We got married at an airport. Every month, he would ask me to marry him, formally ask me to get married. And I kept putting it off. Finally, in 2004, I told Norwood, yes, let's get married. It was a delightful relationship. It was, without a doubt, the finest time of my life. He was 97 when he died, so a couple of old fogies. I was looking for Social Security aid. Nothing happened that wasn't routine. in the beginning. However, at the very end of it, when I thought, well, now all we got to do is sign some papers and that's it, huh? She says, well, because of the uniqueness of this, I have to submit this to review. And I, what review? And she told me that anything unusual has to be reviewed by a committee. So I waited a whole year. Finally, I get a letter saying I'm denied. And I'm denied because of the fact that at the time of my marriage, I was not legally a woman. Those were the words that were in the denial. And so I was shocked. I was shamed. That is so insulting. It was just devastating. And Lambda sent in the appeal. I am certainly wanting to bring this forth because to make this transition is not easy. A lot of young people have lost their families, lost their support. And my suggestion to them was to do what I did. Don't do anything. Rely on the basis of the fact that they loved you once, and it will start shining through again. Several people that I knew that changed their sex committed suicide. Just simply horrible because they didn't have anyone look at them and say, I understand, and I still want you to live. I hope that Lambda succeeds in this case, not for the money, but for the act of humanity that is absolutely necessary here.
I'm gonna make a sequel to that little intro, I think. I didn't have final cut on that. Hi. I also didn't get my homework in time. Just doing it last minute, so I don't have it in the nifty pretend that I'm not really reading this. So you'll know I'm reading this. Okay. Haven't given a speech ever. Get it. You're very encouraging. I love you. So, I'm at my hairdresser's. He's gay. Go figure. And he's asking me about this event, and I say, yeah, the HRC wants to give me an award. Really, he says. Award for what? I say, well, I guess kind of for being myself. He's like playing with my hair and he's looking at me like, yeah, I guess you make a pretty good you. And I'm like, yeah, well, there wasn't a lot of competition. And then because he's a catty bitch, he goes, yeah, good thing, just imagine if you had lost. So I've been going to this hairdresser who's this gorgeous, lovely man for almost 6 years. He knows everything about my family, how close I was to my grandma, how I met and married the love of my life. He did our hair for our wedding 3 years ago. He's seen the drunken, pornographic pictures of our honeymoon in Mykonos. But he doesn't know that I directed the Matrix trilogy with my brother Andy. And so he knows all about who I am, but he doesn't know what I do. Conversely, I was recently out to dinner with a mixture of friends and strangers who are all very excited to meet a Hollywood director. But all they want to do is ask about Keanu Reeves, Tom Hanks, and Halle Berry. And throughout the dinner, they repeatedly refer to me as he or one of the Wachowski brothers, sometimes using half my name, La. As an awkward bridge between identities, unable or perhaps unwilling to see me as I am, but only for the things I do. Every one of us, every person here, every human life represents a negotiation between public and private identity. For me, that negotiation took a more literal form in a dialogue between Andy, Tom Tickfer, our new brother by love, who's just gorgeous, with whom we directed our latest movie, Cloud Atlas. Thanks for the plug. Go see it. Several months ago, we were sitting in this Berlin club amidst beer-soaked haggardness of a space not intended to be inhabited by people and sunlight. Trying to decide if we should shoot this introduction to a trailer for our movie that's about to be posted online. Tom Hanks was supposed to do it, but now he was unavailable. Andy and I have not done press or made a public appearance, including premieres, in over 12 years. People mistakenly believe that this has to do with my gender. It does not. After The Matrix was released in '99, we both experienced this alarming contraction of our world and thus our lives. We became acutely aware of the preciousness of anonymity, understanding it as a form of virginity, something you only lose once. Anonymity allows you access to civic space, to a form of participation in public life, to an egalitarian invisibility that neither of us was prepared to give up. We told Warner Brothers that we decided we didn't want to do press anymore. They told us, no. This is, they were absolutely not. This is non-negotiable. Directors are essential to selling, marketing a movie. We said, okay, we get it. So if it's a choice between making movies or doing press, we've decided we're not going to make movies. They said, hang on. Like, maybe there's a little room for negotiation. So this position and that negotiation was being re-examined in Berlin 3 months ago. All of us are conscious of the fact that not only will it be Andy and my first public appearance in a long time, but it'll also be the first time that I speak publicly since my transition. Parenthetically, this is a word that is a very complicated subject for me because of its complicity in a binary gender narrative that I am not particularly comfortable with. Yet I realize the moment I go on camera, that act will be subject to projections that are both personal and political. I have been out to my family and friends for over a decade, and the majority of that time I've been discussing this particular moment with my therapist, my family, and my wife, because I know eventually I'm going to do it, but I also know that there is going to be a price for it. I wasn't sure how it was going to come out. I just knew that when I finally did come out, I didn't want it to be about my coming out. I am completely horrified of the talk show, the interrogation and confession format, the weeping, the tears of the host. Whose sympathy underscores the inherent tragedy of my life as a transgendered person. And this moment fulfilling the cathartic arc of rejection to acceptance without ever interrogating the pathology of a society that refuses to acknowledge the spectrum of gender in the exact same blind way they've refused to see a spectrum of race or sexuality. So the three of us talk. We like to talk. You're probably realizing right now, uh-oh, we got a talker here. There will be an intermission after about an hour or so. And we're alternating perspectives, quite conscious of the fact that we have just made a film about this subject, about the responsibilities human beings have to one another, that our lives are not entirely our own. There is dialogue from the film merging easily with our discussion, and I find myself repeating a line from a character who I was very attached to, who speaks about her own decision to kind of come out. She says, "If I had remained invisible, the truth would stay hidden, and I couldn't allow that." And she says this aware that even at the moment she's saying it, that the sacrifice she has made will cost her her life. Suddenly I begin this very intense rush of images, thoughts, and memories going through my mind, a kind of life flashing before my eyes that happens, people describe near-death experiences. As it begins, I start to understand just how complex the relationship between visibility and invisibility has been throughout my life. I remember the third grade. I remember recently moving and transferring from a public school to a Catholic school. In public school, I played mostly with girls. I have long hair, and everyone wears jeans and t-shirts. In the Catholic school, the girls wear skirts, the boys wear pants. I am told I have to cut my hair. I wanted to play foursquare with the girls, but now I am one of them. I am one of the boys. Early on, I am told to get in line after a morning bell, girls in one line, boys in the other. I walk past the girls, feeling this strange, powerful gravity of association. Yet some part of me knows I have to keep walking. As soon as I look towards the other line, though, I feel a feeling of differentiation that confuses me. I don't belong there either. I stop in between them. The nun, I realize, is staring at me. And then she's shouting at me, and I don't know what to do. She grabs me, and then she's yelling at me. I'm not trying to disobey, I'm just trying to fit in. My silence infuriates her, and she starts to hit me, and suddenly, most improbably, if it happened in a movie, you would never believe this, but there's these screeching tires, and my mom suddenly just happened to be driving by. Like, totally true. She jumps out of her car, she hurls herself at this nun, rips me away from her, rescuing me. She warns her, the nun, never to touch me again. And I have. I think I'm safe, but then she takes me home and she's trying to understand what happened, but I have no real language to describe it. I just stare at the floor and she keeps asking me over and over what happened, and I begin to feel the same frustration, the same mounting fury that I felt with the nun. She tells me to look at her, but I don't want to, because when I do, I'm unable to understand why she can't see me. The last time I was asked to make a speech like this one, it was my 8th grade graduation. I was valedictorian of my class, and Mr. Henderson, my teacher, informed me that I got to give a speech as a result of being valedictorian. I didn't think this was a very good deal. I'm not sure about this little award thing either, but being painfully shy, I declined. I said, let someone else be valedictorian. He didn't like this answer. He said, that's not how it works. He said he understood how I felt. No one likes giving speeches. Why do we do it? But sometimes I had to think about not just myself. I had to speak for my class, and I had to speak for my parents, who would be very proud of me, he said. There are some things that we have to do for ourselves, but there are other things that we do for other people. So I wrote this speech back then, much as I wrote this one, with butterflies churning. I worked on it at night, wearing the slip that I used as a nightie that I had stolen from my sister. I wrote about the way that knowledge had an actual materiality, not unlike the materiality of a ladder that could be used to gain access to places and worlds that were previously unimaginable. I have no real memory of giving that speech. I remember afterwards being in the bathroom, hiding in a locked stall, feeling the slip I wore under my suit as I cried, feeling stupid and that I was a liar because I was unable myself to imagine a world where I would ever fit in. In high school, I joined theater department partially because of my older sister, but mostly because of the storeroom high above the stage amongst the catwalks that was filled with costumes. I fell in love with this storeroom as much for its dust-scented privacy where I would sit and read as for the racks of dresses and endless rows of shoes. I remember wearing this beautiful brocaded dress one day with a built-in corset when suddenly I heard the stage manager calling my name. Just before she opened the door, I dove desperately into the shadowed folds beneath the rack dresses, heart pounding like a mouse, listening to her call my name over and over, praying that somehow I might remain invisible. As I grew older, an intense, anxious isolation coupled with constant insomnia began to inculcate an inescapable depression. I have never slept much, but during my sophomore year in high school, when I watched many of my male friends start to develop facial hair, I kept this strange, relentless vigil, staring in the mirror for hours, afraid of what one day I might see. Here, in the absence of words to defend myself, without examples, without models, I began to believe voices in my head that I was a freak, that I am broken, that there is something wrong with me, that I will never be lovable. After school, I go to the nearby Burger King and I write a suicide note. It ends up being over 4 pages. I'm a little talkative. But it was addressed to my parents, and I really wanted to convince them that it wasn't their fault. It was just that I didn't belong. I cry a lot as I write this note, but the staff at Burger King have seen it all before. And they seem immune. I was very used to traveling home quite late because of the theater. I know the train platform will be empty at night because it always is. I let the B train go by because I know the A train will be next and it doesn't stop. When I see the headlight, I take off my backpack and I put it on the bench. It has the note in front of it. I try not to think of anything but jumping as the train comes. Just as the platform starts to rumble, suddenly I notice someone walking down the ramp. It is a skinny older man wearing overly large 1970s square-style glasses that remind me of the ones my grandma wears. He stares at me the way animals stare at each other. I don't know why he wouldn't look away. All I know is that because he didn't, I am still here. Years later, I find the courage to admit that I am transgendered and that this does not mean that I am unlovable. I meet a woman, the first person that has made me understand that they love me not in spite of my difference, but because of it. She is the first person to see me as a whole being. And every morning I get to wake up beside her. I can't tell you how grateful I have been for those two blue eyes in my life. In Sydney, Australia, I finally came out to my family. When I told my mom what was going on, she jumped on a plane immediately. There was this big, tear-soaked baptism. And she confessed that she'd been afraid to come here to arrive and grieve the loss of her son. But when she arrived, she found it wasn't so much as a death as it was a discovery, that there was this other part of me, an unseen part, and she felt it was like a gift because now she could get to know that part of me. We went to dinner. I dressed as feminine as I could, wanting to be seen by strangers as Lana, hoping that waiters would not call me sir or he, as if these people suddenly had the power to confirm or deny my existence. My mom is also a bit talkative. She always introduces herself to the waiter or waitress. And she's like, "Hi, I'm Lynn. This is my daughter Lana." And the waitress smiled and said, "Wow, she looks just like you." When my dad arrived, he shrugged it off. Easier than accepting that his wife and daughter had once voted for Jane Byrne instead of Harold Washington. A choice that still rankles him today. He said, "Look, if my kid wants to sit down and talk to me, I'm a lucky man. What matters is that you're alive, you seem happy, and that I can put my arms around you and give you a kiss." Now, having good parents is just like the lottery. You're just like, "Oh my God, I won the lottery. What the? I didn't do anything." I remember thinking about my dad's words, his acceptance of me when my wife and I first read about Gwen Arroyo. It seemed impossible that something like that could happen so close to this city. And yet here was this person like me murdered by ignorance, by prejudice, murdered by intolerance. It seemed in direct inverse proportion to the kind of acceptance of my family. murdered by a kind of fear that seeks to obliterate any evidence that would prove that the world is different from the way they want to see it, from the way they want to believe it to be. Invisibility is indivisible from visibility. For the transgender, this is not simply a philosophical conundrum. It can be the difference between life and death. A few short weeks ago, after my coming out, three of us, Tom, Andy, and I, were being interviewed. One of the reporters ventured away from the subject of the film towards my gender. Imagine that, a reporter. My brother quickly stepped in. Look, just so we're clear, he says, if somebody asks something or says something about my sister that I don't like, understand I will break a bottle over their head. Few words express love clearer than these. I am here because Mr. Henderson taught me that there are some things we do for ourselves, but there are some things we do for others. I am here because when I was young, I wanted very badly to be a writer. I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I couldn't find anyone like me in the world, and it felt that my dreams were foreclosed simply because my gender was less typical than others. If I can be that person for someone else, then then the sacrifice of my private civic life may have value. I know I am also here because of the strength and courage and love that I am blessed to receive from my wife, my family, and my friends. And in this way, I hope to offer their love in the form of my materiality to a project like this one started by the HRC. So that this world that we imagine in this room might be used to gain access to other rooms, to other worlds previously unimaginable. Thanks very much.
Hello friends, we're here to talk about a very important issue of the times with two very special people. This is Dana, and we're going to talk about a very current issue. First of all, Dana, tell us where you're from and where were you born?
I was born in Great Neck on Long Island. It's the first town outside of Queens. Very Jewish town, and I'm a Jewish girl. Yeah.
And a New York girl.
Yeah, yes. It's very much a bridge and tunnel kind of crowd in Great Neck, yeah.
Tell us about your growing up.
So when I was a little kid, my best friend was my female neighbor next door. And I was very much into all of the Disney princesses. I wanted to be Esmeralda and Pocahontas. I would go next door and play Pretty Princess with Jenny all the time. And in my early years, it was sort of a world devoid of gender in a lot of ways. I didn't really understand the difference between boys and girls. So I just assumed I was a girl because that's what I felt like, and all the people that I look up to were women. And it wasn't until later, I still remember my first instance of really understanding the difference between boys and girls was in kindergarten. We were allowed to dress up for Halloween, and I wanted to dress up as Pocahontas. And my parents kept on saying, no, you can't dress up as Pocahontas. And I would say, why can't I dress up as Pocahontas? And they would say, because you're a boy, and boys can't dress up as Pocahontas. So the compromise was I got to dress up as Pocahontas' father, and I was able to talk them into still letting me have a long wig. And they were worried, and I think rightly so. It was less about shaming my gender identity at that age, and it was more about concerns that I would be bullied or targeted, which I already was a target for bullying.
Even in kindergarten?
Yes, because I was already clearly different. I was feminine, all of my friends were girls. So even at that age, I was already a target, yeah.
And what was it like as you grew older? Junior high school, high school?
So as I started to go into middle school, I started to notice that I was attracted to boys. I was getting crushes on boys in my class. And I actually came out as gay to most of my closest friends at a very young age. I was only 11. And at that time, I just assumed that all gay men wanted to be women to some extent. I didn't know what being trans was. And so the bullying continued throughout middle school.
Did you make any friends?
It was really this, I didn't make a lot of friends in school, but there was this teen center / art center called Levels that I started going to when I was 12. And basically that place was where all the kids who were different somehow gathered. And I ended up finding this core group of friends who really, they're still some of my best friends today. And I don't know how I would have gotten through those years without them. So I had come out as gay, I was being bullied mercilessly. And then the thing that I find fascinating is that when I was around 14 years old, I hadn't hit puberty yet, and I was convinced after seeing this Jerry Springer episode where there was a girl who had always, who was assigned male at birth, but always felt like she was a girl, and then she hit puberty, and it turned out she had an intersex disorder, and she started to develop as a woman. I was convinced that that was going to happen to me. And then by the time I started to hit puberty, that bubble had clearly burst. Now, again, I was already out as gay, but what I found interesting was the intersectionality between queer identity, feminism, misogyny, all of that sort of stuff, because I started to study all of the boys. I started to notice how they moved their arms, how they walked, how they talked, and I started to take on those behaviors. And even though I was out as gay, because I was butch or masculine, I was non-threatening. I suddenly became non-threatening. And I would watch as boys who accepted me would then go and pick on a different kid who was effeminate, you know, for whatever reason. And then during this time, while I was butching it up, I was going through puberty, and it was so emotionally painful. And I desperately felt like what was going on was wrong. And I didn't feel like I could tell anyone. I didn't even know what it was.
You didn't speak up for the bullying that was going on?
No. I think I was so bullied when I was a kid that I was just grateful for being left alone. And, you know, I think actually that's part of why I tend to be very vocal about trans issues these days, and also very aware of my privilege as someone who, someone who's perceived as white, someone who is most often perceived as cisgender, that within the trans community I have privilege. And often trans women like me are the first ones that the mic is handed to. So I think that there's also a responsibility in that.
Well, that's a great sense of responsibility and nobility that you have, I must say.
Yeah.
And how was were your parents with you at this stage of the game?
My parents had no idea what was going on when I was a teenager, even though I was secretly stealing hormones from my mom and clothes and all of this sort of stuff, because I had so built this like straight acting gay man persona. And when I had come out to them as gay, they were immediately accepting, and they were very much like, well, obviously we knew that was coming. And when I came out as trans, my dad was actually really accepting right from the get-go. I remember his first comment was, as long as you don't pick some crazy name. Like, that was it. My mom had a really difficult time with it at first, and she just didn't understand it. She would say things like, why can't you just live life as a gay man and embrace your femininity, or why can't you basically why can't you just put off transitioning for a few years and really make sure that you're really sure that this is what you want to do. And I very much felt like I was disappointing her.
But she had accepted you with your feminine quality, and she couldn't go the next step.
No. And I really felt like I was disappointing her at the time. And I was ready to start hormones, I was seeing a gender therapist, and I kind of receded back into the closet for a little bit. And then I ended up having a complete breakdown over my gender identity a year later. And I was having basically, it started with a panic attack that then lasted for 3 weeks. And I got to a point where I knew that the only choice was transition or kill myself. It got that dark. And I think that my mom seeing me in that much pain, and then seeing me as I've transitioned, and seeing me become so much more comfortable in my own skin, I think that that has made her start to, not only, I shouldn't say start to, it has made her really understand so much more. And at this point, she's a very proud mother of a trans daughter and very much looks at me as her daughter and is wonderfully supportive.
That's great. Now, what would you say to our viewers here, or more specifically to the parents who have children like you? What kind of advice, or what would you share with them?
I would say the big thing is listen to your children and trust your children and trust your children's instincts. And remember that difference is not necessarily a bad thing, and that being trans is different. It's not wrong, it's just different. And that if your kid expresses an identity, a trans identity at a young age, trust your child and go with your child on that journey and support your child. Don't be your child's first bully.
Thank you so much, Dana, for sharing
I
your
love
very
your shirt.
personal part. Well, this shirt is a fundraiser. Pee next to me. What would I say? You can pee next to me. I can't read the upside down. But you can pee next to me. This is a fundraiser for Equality North Carolina, because as you probably all know, North Carolina has this horrible transphobic bill, HB 2, and we want to make sure that that campaign against that is sufficiently funded. And so for $25, you can have this t-shirt, P next to me, or what is it? You can pee next to me. I thought I had it memorized, but I'm reaching that point in life. Thank you so much,
Thank
Dana,
you.
for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
You're contributing to making this a better society,
Thank
a
you.
healthier society, and a much more vibrantly diverse society.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those of you who are just viewing now, we have a discussion on a very important subject going on here. Dana just left us, and we have Lane who's joined us. It's a very special discussion on a very important subject. Can you sit a little bit closer?
Of course.
Well, now, let's get to know you first. Tell us something about where you were born and what your life was like at the beginning.
So I was born in New Haven, Connecticut on June 10th, Judy Garland's birthday. Important fact.
Very symbolic.
It's very symbolic of who I am. I grew up in a small town. Much like Dana, I always knew that there was something off about me. But I was always so strange that I didn't necessarily understand it was about gender. I knew that I didn't fit in with the girls, but I also didn't really fit in with the boys. One of my earliest instances that I expressed an interest in being a boy was actually in preschool. I went to a Catholic preschool run by Italian nuns. And they asked me one day what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said a fireman with a brown mustache. And
A brown mustache.
A brown mustache.
That was the important.
That was like, the fireman was secondary, the mustache was primary. And they all laughed, like hysterically.
Why do you
And
think that was?
because here was this little girl, you know, with this long hair and this dress saying that she wanted a mustache. And to me, I couldn't understand why that was funny.
Did your father have a mustache?
He did not. I really wanted him to have one, and I think that I actually pressured him into growing one at a point later down the road.
You are an assertive person.
It was so I could live vicariously through him.
Well, tell us as you grew up how life began to, or what you started discovering about yourself.
Yeah, so as I said before, I always knew I didn't really fit in, but it wasn't necessarily about gender. I was always very masculine, but tomboys are generally accepted in society. There are a lot of tomboys, it's not a big deal. It wasn't until I started to hit puberty in 4th grade that I knew something was really wrong. I started growing breasts, and it was just horrible, horrible. I felt so uncomfortable in my own skin, and I still didn't know that trans was a thing. I wouldn't find that out until a lot later when I was in middle school. In 6th grade, I definitely knew that I was interested in girls. Definitely. But it would take until I was in 8th grade to actually admit that to people. So I first came out as a lesbian. And
To whom?
to my peers, to my parents.
Oh, with your parents as well.
Yeah, and they were totally fine with that. Again, it was sort of like, duh, you know, we've known this since you were a child.
The tomboy.
Yes, just it was expected. And to my classmates, it was not so great. So I had already sort of been trying to fly under the radar as much as I could, just get good grades, be very quiet, keep to myself. When I came out, all of a sudden I was a spectacle. I was what everybody was looking at. I was pushed into lockers. I had food thrown at me in the cafeteria. The teachers just didn't help me out when they saw me being blatantly bullied. And that was really difficult and really made me doubt who I was becoming in society. And at the time, I knew I was trans because I knew that it was a thing already. I learned from YouTube, actually. But seeing this response from coming out as gay, I was like, there is no way that I can be a trans person or do anything about it.
When you were being bullied like that, that's really irresponsible. Did you share that with your parents, that this was happening in school?
No, I didn't. And years later, when I did tell them, they both expressed, you know, a lot of sadness that I hadn't told them just how bad it was and what was going on, because they really just cared about my safety and my comfort first and foremost. But I felt so rejected by everybody for the way I was being treated by, you know, my peers, that I just kept it all inside.
And so the Your parents talk to the teachers to try to get them to
No,
take
because
more
I
responsibility?
didn't tell them. I didn't really tell anybody. My friends saw it happening, but I was still kind of the leader in my friend group. So every once in a while I would stand up for myself, but it became so constant and I became so exhausted doing that I just sort of let it happen.
And when did you decide you're going to take charge of your life?
That was when I realized that I'm definitely trans and I can't hold off transition anymore. It did become a question of life or death. My grandmother had died and it made me question everything about what I knew to be. And that was when I knew that I thought I could put off transitioning until after college, which is laughable now because here I was at 16 like, no, I've got to do it now. I came out to my friends, lost a few. A lot of them didn't understand it, but they tried to. But the majority were like, yeah, I mean, never knew that this was a thing that you could do, but it makes sense for you.
At 16 to make a decision like that takes a lot of guts.
Yeah, but the thing is too that I had been thinking about it for a few years at that point. It had always been stewing in the back of my mind. It was just a matter of, was I going to do it and when I was going to do it.
And how did you go about doing that?
So I came out to friends. I came out to my parents about a year later, and I thought that it would go well since they had understood so quickly when I came out as gay what that meant. But they did not take it well. It was really hard for a while there. I started seeing a gender therapist, and at the time, I didn't really need to be in that therapy. It was just sort of going through the motions to know I would have to get a letter from him to go on hormones or to do any kind of surgeries. And for me, that was the right choice. That's what I wanted to do. But the therapist, I think, did help my parents understand it a lot more. So it ended up being a really good thing to do.
A positive thing for your parents.
Yeah. And their first concern was safety. I mean, yes, they had trouble understanding it and thought it was a phase or that I wasn't sure, but their biggest concern was that I was going to be a target and that I would be bullied and that I would never find anybody who would love me for who I was, that it would affect my career. That was their main thing.
Well, you mentioned your career. What kind of life are you planning for yourself, or are you living now, and what do you see for the future?
So I like to say that I would like to be a professional queer, which essentially means I get paid for it, or at least I can make a living doing it. So I've been working at different LGBTQ-based nonprofits since I was in high school. And right now I work at an AIDS project center in HIV prevention, and I work with mainly, queer clientele. And I just see myself continuing on that path and hopefully one day getting an LCSW and doing gender therapy, hopefully to help, specifically younger trans kids out.
Well, that's an important contribution you're making, because I think society as a whole don't have an understanding.
Yeah.
And by your sharing your life as we are doing here and working with these various nonprofits to bring about understanding so that we have a healthier society, a better society.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that. Would you, if you were to say something to our audience of your peers who are struggling with this, what would you say to them?
I think the biggest thing I would say is stop worrying so much about what other people think. Obviously, safety is always the first concern, but if you spend your time worried about how you'll be perceived by everybody else, you're just going to be exhausted. It's not worth it in the long run. It's okay to not be the norm. It's okay to defy society and to live authentically, whatever that means for you. Always keeping in mind that safety is the ultimate goal, but just try to live your authentic life as best as you can.
Well, thank you, Lane.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
It's an important contribution you've made to the discussion, and to all of you, we thank you for watching. And you may have seen this. You can pee next to me. This t-shirt is a fundraiser for Equality North Carolina, because as you know, in North Carolina, they've passed a very transphobic law, and it's going to, the problems that both Dana and Lane have shared is being inflicted on not only the young people, but adults as well in that state. They're paying a high price for it. That law created, the issue was manufactured by right-wing politicians, and so we need to fight that. And buying this T-shirt at omaze.com/equality will contribute your help to fighting this kind of transphobia. So thank you all very much, and thank you especially to Dana and to Lane.
My name is Rose. I'm a transgender girl. I was born a boy, but I always knew that I was a girl.
My name is Devon. I'm a trans male. That means I was born female, and I live now as a male. When I was 3, I decided that I was going to grow up and be a father and marry Janet Jackson.
She would write letters to Santa Claus, to the Tooth Fairy. When would I be turned into a girl? Could you turn me into a girl?
I'm Jay. I'm a non-binary trans person. That means that I'm not a man, nor am I a woman. I was raised as a girl, but when I learned about non-binary gender identities, it was like a whole new world had opened up for me.
My name is Ronnie, and my sister Ellie is transgender.
Ellie told us on her 4th birthday that she was a girl in her heart and her brain. And I said, "You're my favorite princess boy." And what did you say, Ellie?
No, I'm a princess girl.
My struggling point was this had to be a phase.
The reality is acceptance takes a while.
I was terrified of coming out. I was afraid of losing friends, family, loved ones. I was afraid of this discrimination and potential violence I could face.
I was so terrified that I wanted to die. Got threatening letters. One of the quotes said, do us a favor, Paula, and put that gun back up to your head and finish the job.
I'm scared as a dad for her safety, whether a society will be as accepting as her family and her friends are.
I feel embarrassed and unsafe when people out me to other people.
If there isn't a gender-neutral bathroom available, when there are only men's and women's bathrooms, I have to make a decision about how I look that day and whether there's more risk for me going into the men's room or the women's room.
I was chased by 4 people in the metro for being transgender.
I have been denied health care. I have been gawked at. I've been humiliated. I have been physically assaulted several times when using a bathroom.
Seeing her face the first time we let her wear a dress outside of the house, pretty special.
You're different, that's okay. Just keep on being yourself.
Support means listening, maybe not understanding, but just listening and being there for me.
Pushing back on jokes or offensive comments at the expense of transgender people.
The easiest way to support transgender people is to follow their lead.
Supporting transgender people means letting them be who they are.
I'm proud to be trans because I want to be myself.
I'm proud to be trans because I think life is too short to be anything besides what you are. This is who I am.
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 For as long as I can remember, I've always recognized myself as a girl. I hung out with all of the other girls, I talked like the other girls, and I had eyes only for makeup, Barbies, and girls' toys, all of which could be found in the pink aisle at Toys R Us. Before my hair had grown long, I would wear my favorite red turtleneck around my head like Ariel's long flowing hair, and every Halloween I would tell my parents I wanted to be a girl. A witch one year, and a princess the next year, and of course another princess the following year, but you know, Disney. The point is, I was clearly a girl, but the one thing that I couldn't beg my parents into getting for me was actual girlhood. Now, if you haven't figured it out already, I am transgender, but don't worry, I'm not here to raid your bathrooms and take your women. I'm here to tell you what it's like to be trans, what it's like to struggle every day with acceptance from yourself and those around you. And of course, that inevitable question of which bathroom do we put this kid in? I was born in upstate New York with an identical twin brother 10 minutes behind me, a mother who always did her best to make sure I was happy, and a father whose expectations for a son I did not exactly meet. He expected that my brother and I, Jonas, that's his name, and before you say anything, yes, I know our names together, Nicole and Jonas do sound like Nick Jonas. He expected that Jonas and I were each going to get our own baseball gloves, play catch with him, and go hunting. In fairness, we did do some of these things. I turned out to hit a better home run than my brother, and I could do it in heels. But because of the expectations that my father had, it was harder for him to accept his child as transgender. He wasn't prepared, and he didn't have the information on how to raise a transgender kid. And of course, there was always that question for him, what do the neighbors think? So rather than deal with me, he buried himself in hobbies and tried to ignore the flamboyance of his son. As you can imagine, this left my mother pretty on her own for a while when my brother and I were little. She's an independent woman and always tries her best to see the best in people. So when it came to her child's gender, she didn't have a lot of expectations for what me and Jonas were supposed to be like. She didn't care what the neighbors thought. She cared whether or not we were safe around the neighbors. She knew that the world wasn't always going to be an accepting place, so she vowed that at the very least, I was going to have a safe place to come back to in her home. The only problem with that, though, was that my dad, at home, didn't get it. So she started trying to educate him. She left some literature lying around for him, but when he didn't show much interest, she did what any other sensible spouse would do. She left the book in the bathroom. And lo and behold, when he had run out of other stuff to read in there, there was the book, She's Not There, by Jennifer Boylan. This was the beginning of my dad really trying to come around to me being transgender, and everyone in my family helped, including Jonas, who, at no more than 8, walked up to my dad and said, "Face it, you have a son and a daughter." With my family on board, we could start trying to make my transition public. We worked with the school up in Orono, which is where we moved when Jonas and I were 5, and we all decided on a gradual transition. What this meant was I wasn't going to burst into school one day in a full dress, pearls, and heels and let everyone process that. What it meant was that we were going to spread my transition out over the course of elementary school, starting with pink, wearing my hair longer, using the single-stall girls' bathroom, followed in 5th grade by the multi-stall girls' bathroom, wearing skirts, and finally using my real name, Nicole. What I really liked about the gradual transition was that everyone was cooperating, and it put no strain on the other students because they were all eased into it with me. Everything was perfect. Until in 5th grade. A student who had moved there the year before and wasn't there for our gradual transition told his grandfather about me. And his grandfather was part of a special interest Christian right group, and he didn't think that my using the girls' bathroom was okay at all. So, logically, the best course of action was to send his grandson in after me. His grandson follows me into the girls' bathroom one day, looks me in the face, and says, "My grandpappy says that we don't have to have any faggots in our school." I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of all of my family's hard work coming apart. The school stopped cooperating with us. They pulled me from the girls' bathroom and made me out to be the one who'd done something wrong. After a few months of isolation, I decided to start using the girls' bathroom again of my own accord. But when the grandson caught on, he made another stunt. And again, I found myself in the principal's office with her giving me a look and saying, "You knew you weren't supposed to go in there." So from then on through the end of 6th grade, I was to have a bodyguard who was to follow me at all times, stand 10 feet behind me, and make sure that I used the isolation chamber of a bathroom, just because the school was afraid that the grandfather's group would sue. I would get up to go to the bathroom from class, and the teacher would stop me at the door and tell me to wait for whoever was following me that day in front of everybody. The humiliation was unimaginable. My family eventually had to leave that school and leave Orono because the school could not and would not be reasoned with. For the next 2 years, we had to live in hiding and live apart because my father had to stay behind to keep his job. For those next 2 years in middle school, my parents had to warn me and Jonas never to tell anyone who we were, or we would have to move again. So I shut down for those 2 years. I didn't have any sleepovers, and I didn't visit any friends. I was like a ghost. I went to school, and I came home. When the time for high school came, we were approached by a local private school, a place called Waynfleet. And from my visits there, I learned that they were progressive and forward-thinking, and my brother and I were both accepted. And the best part was, my parents told us that at this new school, we wouldn't have to hide anymore. So at Waynfleet, they start each school year off by sending the students on a bonding trip. They do this by dropping the freshmen in the middle of the woods and tell us to get along. It's charming. We stay in yurts. But during this trip, I noticed something I was struggling with. I didn't know how to tell these kids who I was. In those 2 years of being so diligent at keeping my secret, I had actually forgotten how to come out to people. It had been so easy when I was younger. I would just walk up to somebody and say, "My name's Wyatt. I'm a boy who wants to be a girl. What's your name?" But now it was a mystery to me. So I spent that entire trip sitting on my secret, and I just remember how uncomfortable I was when I watched all of my new classmates get in their swimsuits and go down to the lake together. On the bus ride home, I sat next to a girl named Leah, who I'd grown particularly close to, and about halfway through the ride, she told me that she had a secret. She told me that she was pansexual. Imagine my relief. So, this was my chance, and I latched onto this kid. I'm serious. I grabbed her, and I held her. And I came out to her on that bus for the first time in 2 years. And she actually told me that it was cool. She asked me a couple of questions, and what she really did was give me a place to talk about myself that I hadn't had in years. And she gave me the confidence to keep coming out to other kids at Waynfleet as the weeks went on. And every response that I got was very yes and. The fact that I was transgender was not big news to these kids. And they made me feel like it was the most normal thing in the world, because it is. Another strange thing happened while I was at Waynfleet. Somewhere during my 4 years there, and I don't know when, I came to be okay with being trans. I could accept myself and my body. I came to feel normal, and I didn't even realize it. I was able to reach a point where, I wasn't exactly comfortable with what I had down there, but it wasn't the biggest travesty anymore. And it was people like Leah who gave me the space to do so. Acceptance at home is fundamental, yes, but frankly, it's just not enough. Trans youth, like most young people, spend the majority of their time in school. And if you spent Monday through Friday from 8 to 3 being told that you weren't okay, that you were wrong, how are you supposed to think otherwise? Home and community being accepting together create a space where kids can accept themselves. I was able to do it because the fact that I was trans wasn't being constantly shoved down my throat. And I didn't have to spend every second of every day thinking about it, hiding it, and feeling like I was an abnormality. Trans kids, we deal with this 2 to 3-year-old concept of gender. Cis kids, your gender is affirmed immediately. But trans kids don't get that. We don't get to focus on what do we want to be when we grow up. I don't even remember. All I remember is that I needed to be a girl, and I couldn't move on until that was affirmed and validated. I was trapped in gender. We're reminded of it on every legal form ever. Passports, licenses, taxes, applications, even bathrooms are separated, male and female. Now, there's a lot of important messages that I could highlight for you all. And trust me, I could go on forever about every little thing that needs to be done in the fight for trans equality, but I'll spare you. What I want you all to leave here today knowing is that you can be Leah. You have the power to make a difference in someone's life. Because you never know when a transgender person is going to come into your life, you need to be prepared and you need to be ready to help them. It might just be some kid at your grandson's school, or it might be your daughter. Either way, you have to be prepared. My father didn't think it had anything to do with him. Guess what? It did. If you are on this earth, you are part of the trans story. You need to be ready to be Leah. You have the power to help someone by imagining more than 2 boxes, male or female. You have the power to create safe environments where whichever box they check isn't the most important part of somebody. You have the power to educate others and yourself. You have the power to bridge those gaps. You have the power. Thank you.